Hello, everybody. TJ Schwartz here. Welcome back to the Edge and Flow podcast. I'm here with Lucas Burnley, and we set off on our last episode at the very end on accomplishing a 1 week objective we each did, and we're going to touch base on whether we got that done. What was your objective for the week?
I left the end of the week with an unfinished air management system in my shop. So basically, switching over to Rapid Air Max Line, I'd run some of the main runs, and I was just like bogged down in the details. I did finish it, but
Nice.
on a modified level. So I was running two main rooms, my grinding room and then like my main shop. And what I realized, I don't know exactly where I want it all to run in my grinding room. I also ran into a material problem um, in that I couldn't find a bunch of plumbing fittings that I needed in town.
Mm, mm,
And so I just decided to finish all of the runs in the main workshop and then cap the grinding room.
okay.
But I also designed the rest of the grinding room. So now I know where my drops are going to go. So 80% total completion, but like the thought work is also done. So I'm going to say like
Nice.
90% complete.
So, what all do you use the air for in the grinding room?
So grinding room, essentially, I like to have kind of an air hose within reach anywhere I
Hmm.
am, just for like dusting off parts.
Yeah.
You can run like little handheld vacuum cleaners off of them, blast cabinet, surface grinder, so bandsaw, like
Mm.
basically just super handy to have
So,
air.
surface grinders in the grinding room.
Surface grinder
Yeah.
is in the grinding room. Arguably doesn't need to be because it's run wet,
Hmm.
but it's a grinder, so it went in the
Yeah.
grinding room.
Yeah.
And then kind
Makes
of the
sense.
same thing outside. So CNC, I've got like a hose reel, and then probably like every 10 feet on the wall, I've got a drop.
Just like a chuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, that way, like if I need to tie into it, I can just splice in
Hmm.
and like say I'm using like a rotary tool, like something like a
If
Fordham,
you
but air
if you
driven
pull your
or
truck in the shop and you want to air up all four tires at once.
yeah, much. Do you have actually speaking of that, do you have one like an inflator deflator? I've got one that will do two tires at the same time.
I don't. I need to do that. I don't have onboard air or anything like
Yeah.
that. Is that what you mean? You have like a
It's not
compressor?
onboard air. I'm supposed to get a compressor here soon, but
Hmm.
I've like put my truck on pause. Naughty truck. Too expensive.
I know.
But it's a really cool system. It's basically just like a manifold with two hoses coming off it. And so
Hmm.
whatever your air supply is, you plug into that one, it's got your gauge and it'll inflate or deflate two tires at the same rate.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Be
pretty
handy.
cool. And I'll send you a link to it. So yeah, that is like the reality. A lot of times I feel like is we set goals and then you have to modify them
Yeah.
either as you get closer to completion or as something like kind of affects it
The
outside of your
abridged
control.
version of the goal.
Yeah. So like I look at it and I'm like, I still feel like I got it done. Right. It just
Nice.
had to be modified.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I had said that I was going to finish the 750 cycle starts and cross the finish line on this batch of scalpels. I failed. I didn't make it.
Really?
I did not make it. And it's not the end of the world because I'm close. I am close and I did run it basically the whole time, but I did have one day I'm on the bevels now and I didn't really know for sure with the new machine what tool life was going to be on that bevel. And so I was thinking I might be short on tools, but I was like worried about ordering a bunch more until I knew the numbers, like until I had some of them run. And so it turns out I was going to fall short on tools, like I could tell. And so I overnighted a set of tools and they were going to get in at like 1 on Friday last week. And so it was Thursday night that I closed out, finished, ran out of tools, was going to wait till midday Friday. And then it occurred to me like, this is forcing me to have a sort of day away from doing that. And so what I did
Right.
is worked on design. And so even though the tools came in midday on Friday, I just set that whole day aside for design and then came in on Monday and started back up again. So I lost basically a day. And so that's basically what's offsetting me to
But
not have
gained a
it
day of
complete.
design.
Yeah. So it's, I didn't achieve the goal, but it wasn't because of some calamity. It was just the way it worked out.
All right. I think I see a theme for
Okay.
today.
Hmm.
Plans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are they worth it? Do they work? Like,
Yeah. And do they are they effective, or are they just like a what is it, a pacifier for your mind? You know what I mean?
ooh, right. Also, like the fact that you switched over to design work, do you have backup plans?
Backup plans
Like, does
for
it make sense? Like, as you're having plans, like, all right, especially around production, right? You're like, okay, everything goes well. My tooling lasts the time it needs to last. I run my parts, nothing breaks. That job is finished. If something happens and I have a block of 24 hours, do you have like automatically have something that is filled
I
with?
always have basically a hopper. And
Yeah.
so it's like there's no shortage of things to take its place.
But
You know
is
what I
it
mean?
like a calculated hopper based on priority, or is it just
Um,
like you have a ton of stuff to do?
a ton of stuff to do generally, but usually there's like two things that are really nagging at me that I just pick one, you know? Sometimes it's like the last minute, like the morning I wake up, or I guess the night when I overnighted the tools, I was like, you know what? I can either wait till noon and try to have a half day machining, or I can just totally divert, kind of like our last conversation about
Yep.
setting the whole day aside for a different mindset. And the one thing that was most, leaning on me was I'm designing the next knife to follow the Overland in my
Yeah.
lineup. And I really, really needed to get it designed and finalized. I've done like half a dozen 3D prints, but I need to get water jet running and I need to get some of the upstream stuff moving. And I can't do it without having that, like, at least the silhouette finalized.
Right.
And so I ordered steel for it. And I was like, when that steel arrives, I would love to have the ability to then just get it water jet and not have steel waiting for
Right.
the design. So I was like, yeah, it's a good time to do that. It's perfect timing in
It's
some
kind of
ways.
staged.
Hmm.
On to like that the maker manager schedule. So I've been doing that now for like a little over 2 weeks.
Hmm.
It is proving to be pretty effective
Hmm.
with some like little modifications. Today is a management day. I woke up, got a head cold, and like I'm not sharp today. And
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not a good manager. I do not want to do emails all day. So like
Yeah, it's tough.
um but what I've been finding is so I've been setting up that like Wednesday as like my heavy hitting management day. But the way that it's kind of working out is almost every day something will pop up. So what I'm doing is I'm just tackling that after usually about like 2 p.m.
Mhm.
Seems
Nice.
like a really good kind of split because if something derails me at 2, I've still got a really solid day of work in the shop behind me.
Mhm.
So it's been pretty satisfying, and it seems like from like a functional standpoint, it's actually working really well.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to really think about integrating something like that because, like I said, I've got a hopper of things that aren't necessarily in the shop. Like most of the things that nag at me are the things not in the shop. Basically, I have
totally.
to sit down in front of a computer for most of those things. And yeah, I gotta think about that. I gotta come up with a scheme. But
Yeah, it is. I mean, it feels like a never ending scheme, but it's like okay, so some of it is based on priority, but like a lot of times, yeah, those the important things are the ones that are like easy to put aside because they're
yeah,
important, but they're not urgent.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like
and
doing QuickBooks for me is one of those where I'm like, I did 4 months worth of QuickBooks in a
oh,
day because I just
allocating,
forgot.
yeah,
I'm supposed to do it
yeah.
every week.
Yeah, those
Like,
stink. Does it track your mileage? Do you use it for that too?
I don't track my mileage. No.
Yeah, because I've gotten to where I've gotten way behind, and I have to remember all the trips that I did because it tracks my mileage. So I'm like,
Right.
oh, why did I go to Ontario that day?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I guess that was
Yeah.
a
If you do it
business
once a
trip.
week, you're good.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's that like muscle memory that is super, super important, I think.
Hmm.
And it as it expands, this is like where this is where like the planning concept I feel like for a lot of people starts to kind of like fall apart and you're in this like reactive, like not
Hmm.
survival mode, but kind of,
Hmm.
right? Which is like the work at hand is taking all of your resources and not allowing you to kind of forecast necessity in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like vision versus focus.
Oh yeah, vision versus focus. That seems accurate.
Mhm.
What, like, in general, are you like a planner? Are you long-term planner?
No, not long term at all. Honestly, all of my plans in my head. I mean, I have like goals that are kind of like just kind of like ideals that I would like to see happen in 5, 10 years, whatever it
Sure,
is.
but they're
But
nebulous.
yeah, they're abstract. But as far as my planning, I'm generally thinking like 3 to 6 months. As far as
That's
executing
fair.
and what I'm
Yeah.
doing with my hands and my mind, you know what I
Yep.
mean? That's about the window that I'm operating on. So like right now, my head is thinking about finishing this year strong, and
Okay.
2023 feels like a bit of a blank canvas. Even though
Right.
I'm starting to piece, it's getting closer, so I'm piecing together like what the first quarter of next year looks like. But right now, everything in my vision on a daily basis is like, okay, by the end of December, I want these things accomplished.
Right. Yeah. And then
So
do you create like waypoints? Like, do you itemize, like break it down into smaller steps? Or do you usually have like kind of a big goal and you generally know what you need to do to accomplish it?
Um, yeah, the thing is, there's a lot of parallel processes.
Right.
So there's like a lot of the things that I have going on are simultaneous in some ways. But yeah, usually it's compartmentalized. Like if I want to have this done by then I need to do this by next week, etc. But I'm not one to like put dates on things of like when I want things done. What
Sure.
really it comes down to is like when if you're trying to like let's say I want to launch this new knife that I'm talking about that I've designed. Okay, I in order to get the steel water jet, I need to get the design finalized. So that's what I need to focus on, and then not letting one of those steps stagnate, but just taking them one at a time and
Right.
completing them. So once the design's done, okay, I need to get them water jet. That means I need to
Right.
come up with a DXF. I need to drop the steel off. I need to get that going, and then one step at a time. But there's, like I said, parallel processes. So there's a few stacks that I'm working through and
Right.
jumping from one stack to the other. But it's like just pulling one item off each stack and doing it, and then just it'll come out when it comes out. It's kind of I'm okay with that. But I do try to remind myself like I want it to come out this year. That's the goal. But that's not,
Overarching. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
So
interesting. The concept of parallel processes is one, I think, that works at a certain scale.
mhm.
And then as like tasks or goals start to expand, I think that one starts to go off the rails.
Yeah.
Because you always have some stuff that is like fairly kind of linear, right? Or
Mhm.
like they work hand in hand. But as soon as you start to bring in some, like we were talking about hats for you, that is kind of parallel, but it's a different level and different process of like design and project management and then
Mhm.
fulfillment. It's different in every way. It just like kind of throws your current system. You're like, oh man, I got to get a hat box.
Mhm.
How am I going to ship hats? Or, whatever it is. And those start to expand. And it's like the conversations around either projects or products, I think after a little while, they start to just be like kind of sole focus,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even in
No.
maybe like in an area, like if you're doing apparel and hats, maybe that's like related.
Mhm.
But like the way I feel that a lot of makers work, they start to be like divergent pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's being only one person is the biggest bummer right now. I wish I could clone myself and then just like put my clone in the closet at night and
Man,
yeah, bring him out and have him do all the work that I need done.
I know. Like
It's like,
running airlines is like that's
yeah,
maintenance.
yeah,
That's like my maintenance
yeah.
department just did a beautiful job running airlines.
Come on, Elon Musk. We need these robots. We need them now.
I know,
Yeah.
man. But I mean, I think over the last like 4 or 5 years, I've really had to look at goals from like a very flexible standpoint and just realize that like the goal itself could change or my ability to complete the goal could change. Like it's a moving target,
Yeah. There's
which is
a,
tricky.
I think goals are good for checkpoints and for the vision side. I
Yeah.
think they're important. But I think for me, the overarching thing that drives me forward is trusting the process, which you hear all the time in
Yeah.
lots of different spheres, because you can't focus on goals like every day because it's like it'll be too far away for you to focus on it
Right.
because your end goal doesn't really apply to what you're going to do today necessarily. Because like I said, if I have those stacks, let's say the next stack is to sit down and finish this design or whatever, it's like, let's say my big goal for next year is like some kind of revenue goal. It's
Yeah.
like I can't think my way into that revenue. I need to
Right.
just do the work now. But what I've found that works really well is if I sit down, maybe it's like a quarterly thing, and set my goal for, like, let's say it was next year, let's say it's next quarter, whatever, and then just make a quick list, only a couple items of what does have to take place for that goal to be met. And there's some semi-large things like I'm going to depart from doing this kind of work. I'm
Right.
going to do more of this kind of work. I'm going to abandon this project, whatever. And then seeing it there, and it's very easy when you're looking at it big picture to say, for me to achieve this goal, these things probably almost have to happen, otherwise
Right.
that goal won't be
First.
reached. And then I'll just remember that, and it's like in my subconscious of like, that's what was required to get to the goal, and just check yourself. And then after that, go back to the stack, you know what I mean, and go
Right.
back to just trust the process, and then circle back to the big goal in a intermittent amount of time. And sometimes, like, I'll set that goal, like I set a goal about a year ago, and then I'll look at this year and say, okay, I did achieve the goal, but I forgot about the goal, but
Right.
I did
It
do the
happened
things
anyway. Like
that I put
you
on
put
that
the
list.
right. You put the pieces in motion. I would say like my process overall has been very similar. And another kind of thing that would tie into this almost is like the idea of a business plan. Like
Hmm.
I get that the business plan is super valuable to a lot of businesses, probably would be valuable to me, but it's always been like a really fluid dynamic
Hmm.
plan. Like because the process is always evolving and changing. I would love for someone to tell me that I'm wrong and like be able to explain to me why I should also have like a dialed business plan.
Yeah.
So
I
if you're
don't, I
listening
don't,
to this and you can, but
I personally, I'd love to hear a case for that, but I don't really
yeah,
adhere to the dialed business plan
right.
concept. I think, I think you got to cowboy it. Honestly, I just think
Dependent on the
instinct.
type of business,
That's true.
right?
That's very true. But I think instinct can't be overstated. You know what I mean? Like if you're moving through a business environment, you're feeling where is pressure and where is a vacuum
Right,
all the time.
right,
And it's like you have to be able to move with flexibility all the
right,
time, 24/7. And if you over define your goals and over define your strategies, then you'll just ignore messages that are being telegraphed to you by the world. You know what I
right.
mean?
We're it's like guerrilla business
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. Like you have to be like small and fast. I mean, well, you don't have to be small, but at the point where you are small, being fast and flexible and adaptable, I think is super, super valuable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can't just like dig your heels in and be like, break yourself upon me,
Yeah.
world. Like
Right.
we're
No
just gonna
kidding.
get run over if we don't move out of the
Yeah.
way or like adapt.
Yeah. And this is a super abstract thing, but I'm a World War II history buff, right? And like the naval scene, the Pacific theater was kind of the US Japan deal. And one of the takeaways you always hear about is like the Japanese could plan better than anyone else in any theater with their naval strategy. But if something went wrong, they could be defeated because their plan would not allow for flexibility.
Right.
Whereas the you kind of stereotypical, like the American cowboy was out there like hacking, but
Right.
they would get a good break and then they would see the opportunity and take it, and it would work out. You know
It
what I
would
mean? And
work.
it's like kind
Yeah.
of the whole story of like the Pacific theater.
Yeah.
And it's like it's kind of a good narrative of like
Yeah.
business
It's a
for me.
good tie in.
Yeah. And it's like having the plan smart, but you can't just stick to it because it's what you decided to do when things were different, you know?
Right. That the things being different is I think one of the most critical elements. So it's like if you made plans when you were 20, would they still be where you wanted to end up when you were 40?
Hmm.
Depending on the type of plan, probably. Right? Like there's definite like and some people more so than others. But man, it's like along the path, I feel like we learn so much of like what we want, or like what our capabilities are, what the end goal might look like. That, yeah, I've always thought of plans as kind of like like, what did you said a checkpoint. I kind of think of them as like just like a loose like path,
Hmm.
right? Where you either like, yeah, it kind of gives me like a general direction.
Hmm.
Like I know this is important.
Right. And I've said it before on the podcast, I think, but that's the point where I decide what I'm not doing anymore. Not, and it more important than what I'm going to do, but what I'm going to not do.
Yeah.
Where that's where I make my cuts. That's where I decide I'm shedding this burden. I'm stopping this process. I'm discontinuing this product. That's usually what that means. Like I've become over encumbered and I realize I need that
Right.
checkpoint and I separate from other things. That's how it goes.
Right. The opposite of that being just adding something else of value, which
Yeah.
like the two things are not equal. Like
Mm-mm.
adding something of value is not the same as like canceling something that is not providing you value anymore.
Right. Right.
Maddie and I were actually just talking about this a little while ago. It's really hard. It's hard to know sometimes like where to cut and what,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
it is a hard question because especially when you do, if you have too many irons in the fire and you know it, but you know they all have good opportunities, like
Yep.
they all are good. That's the what makes it hard is like you got to let some of them go, but if you put all your attention into them, they would also succeed more
They
than
would, yeah.
likely. And it's
It's
like
the
that's the
question if
hardest
you, do you
part.
want it to?
Yeah. So you have to focus on the ones that really really get you going, that excite you, that are really the opportunities.
Well, and there's
And
also like the reality that things like everything in its season kind of concept, like
mhm,
things change. So I don't think that having like a super focused, like one goal that you were trying to achieve, like for me would work very well. Cause a lot of times like I take a break from the goals and I would shift it. Right.
mhm,
Man, it's tricky. So in that, I mean, like there's things that I cancel temporarily
mhm.
that still have value.
Yes,
It
but
just,
later.
yes, but later doesn't deserve all of my
Shelf it.
time right now.
Yeah. And
Like,
that's where you get the hopper of
right,
like you've got these half-baked things that are ready to roll whenever, which is kind of a beautiful thing because if something else stalls, call up this other opportunity and
right.
move forward.
Or your brain's in a different place.
Yeah.
Like I spent that week running the airlines and I was really into it until the last day. And I was just like, man, I just want to be working on knives.
Mhm.
Like I got to this point where I was like, all of my thought process and like physical labor has been like doing this just plumbing job. And I got to the last day and I was like, yep, I'm done. And it was great because the time it like timed out in a way where I was like, all right, now I'm moving on to this batch of Quakens,
Mm. Yeah.
and I'm sure when I'm done with those, I'll be like ready to do something else in the shop. That's, I don't know what, I don't know what like a static, stable work life kind of balance for me at this point looks like because we've had the two moves and two kids inside of 5 years. So
Yeah.
I don't know
Very.
what it actually looks like just to like walk
Mm.
into the shop and be like, here's my work
You've been
clearly
on spin
defined.
cycle.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
here's the hours that I have to do it. Here's the like next goal I'm trying to achieve. It's been like 8 things every day just like coming at me from every possible angle.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you like you're in like growth and development phase, but you actually seem like you're working pretty stable, right?
I'm my hours and basically the structure of my day and week and month has never been more stable in my
Yeah.
whole career. It's I have it down to a pretty rigid structure of when I go into work, when I'm done, what I'm trying to do, what the day looks like, what the week looks like, and it's pretty liberating for me in a lot of ways because I think structure. It sounds suppressive, but I think it's liberating more
Right.
than it is
Oh,
suppressive because
I completely agree.
I think just nothing really thrives in chaos.
Right.
Even creativity, I think there's a notion out there that like creativity does well in chaos. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the narrative of like the writer in the
Right.
messy bedroom or the messy,
Yeah. I say it does
sculptors.
well despite chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
There's
Sometimes it
always a
overcomes
system.
chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Overcomes.
but I think the systematic creative person can succeed extremely well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I
I
think the
completely agree.
systematic is it's got to be installed at some point. And
Well,
I went a lot
it's
of
same
years
with
without
money,
it.
right? It's the
Yep.
same with budgeting. It's like, oh, if you're on a budget, you're like limiting yourself. It's like, no, if you're on a budget, you understand your finances, you actually have you like much more financial
Yeah.
freedom,
Yeah.
right? Time is the exact same way.
Do you manage your time or does your time manage you?
Yeah,
It's one or the other. Yeah.
exactly. We have kids,
So
so our time manages us a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
that's a factor. The only thing that's softened my like rigidity with how I work is I have to get good sleep. I'm just built that way, and we have two kids. That one's 6 months, one's 2.5, and sometimes the nights are a little sideways. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like sometimes at 1 in the morning, things are getting weird, and one or both of us is awake, or something's happening. And so it's like sometimes I sleep in and like come in an hour later in the
Yeah.
morning. That's really where the only flexibility is because I could just power through and get up, but then I'll do that for 4 days and get behind on sleep, and then it
It's not
doesn't it
worth it.
doesn't pay. It doesn't pay.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I went
that's
through a period like I set an alarm now, but I mostly wake up around the same time. But like I did that for a long time where I'm like, it doesn't matter. I just set a timer. So I would
mhm,
set like an 8-hour timer. Didn't so whenever I went to bed, it was wake up time was 8 hours after that.
interesting.
That one's pretty good.
That's cool. Hadn't thought
But
about that.
difficult with like try
Yeah.
that with kids. Like
Yep.
so lately I've been doing like two things which are been really good about shutting off my phone about an hour before I go to bed.
I
I'm
need to
kind
do
of a
that.
news hound. I like, and I'm information, right?
Me
I
too.
would say I am an information junkie. So shutting that down and reading, and then, man, trying to get like in bed by 9 is the
Mm,
ideal.
mm,
10 is kind of like the cutoff to where if I don't do that, like the next day I notice it.
mm.
And then I've been doing the same thing with my phone in the morning. Like normally I wake up and I go like, I'll listen to a few like news podcasts and I just stop doing it. And
Yeah.
it has had like a pretty distinct effect on my mornings,
Yeah.
which is a
That's good.
trip. It's just, I mean, an extra 30-minute to an hour runway of just kind of like my own thoughts and like quiet. Theoretically, if Winston doesn't wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and like want to
Right.
party,
That's how it goes.
um, I heard this morning, all I heard was this like shuffle, 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 shuffle. He'd like climbed up into a cabinet and like got this huge box of goldfish out. And it was just like going into the living room, like all right,
Yep. Here we
yeah.
go.
I
Time to
don't
start
know.
the day.
So yeah, like that, like the plans thing from that standpoint, man, it's just like if you try to hold the same plan and method all the time as a like kind of a sole operator, I feel like that is really, really tricky.
Hmm. Yep.
Trying to think of
That's
like kind of in the background, I was trying to think of like if I know anybody who kind of does that. And like I think at least in like the maker community, everyone seems like fairly dynamic,
yeah. I think being
right?
dynamic that's the word,
Yeah.
and maybe it's overused in the business sphere, but it's a good word because I think reading and reacting is is important, and I think that's
Yeah.
where you see people succeed in big ways. It really is. There's an intangible part of it. Everyone's got to do the work, but there is that instinct part of like, can you see what's in front of you or not?
Right.
And part of that is learned. A big part of it, maybe most of it, but you have to develop the instinct to know when to go. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Right.
okay, I see this. I'm going now. And so I think I do think sometimes that like look strange from the outside because
Yeah.
I felt that instinctive pull, like this is the move.
Right.
And then I don't, once that instinct hits me, I just do it.
Right.
And it's like, I rarely kind of like wait on that. And I think it looks strange from the outside, but I've learned to trust it.
Do you think it's learned behavior?
Yeah, for sure.
A really easy one would be like in high school, like you could probably learn when to leave a house party
Hmm.
pretty easily. Like not knowing, like not even having the awareness of like that as a process, but just kind of understanding like, okay, like it's this time of night, like people are acting like this. Whatever
Mhm.
it is, like whatever that input is, there's probably something that's kicking in saying like it's time to leave. I feel
Yep.
like that probably carries through in different elements of our life. Like investing could be a similar, like maybe if you're a
Yeah.
lifelong investor, you're like, like this party's starting to feel like
Yeah.
about done.
Time to leave the party.
Time to leave the party,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
or as it relates to like kind of business. Yeah, I guess in like in the knife side of things, you could look at it from a trends scenario. The odd thing about trends in the knife industry that I've seen is like something can be much more popular for a time, but even if that fades, there's usually enough of an audience and value to it for the people that are like engaged in it to
Mhm.
either not notice or not care,
Yeah.
right? Stylistically, kind of like, or, if you talk about like early 2000s and like a lot of the tactical knives, like all those knives it might not be quite as popular, but they're still popular enough, right?
Yeah.
Or like
Yeah. They've
eras where like people hated brass.
yeah, they
Now it's
like
like brass is
clinched
like a
a market
premium
space.
material. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, and there's a gut feeling aspect to that. And I think trusting your gut, you hear it all the time, overused cliche, but it's true. And with business, for me, I think when I look back, like you obviously make wrong decisions based on your gut, but there's more experiences that I've had where I waited too long to listen to it and then missed an opportunity or wasted an opportunity or knew it was there. And I become that guy that's like, oh, I called that. It's like,
Right.
well, why didn't you
Why did you
invest then?
act
You know
on
what I
it?
mean?
Yeah.
It's the guy like, oh, I was telling you Google was going to get big. It's like, well, how come you're not driving a Ferrari?
Yeah.
It's like,
I think
but
I think for me the idea of not not getting rid of processes has probably had like an effect on some of like the failures. Where just like, yeah, you just like hung on a little bit too long to something.
yeah.
Um that was like a big shift where I realized like, oh no, like I'm getting enough good opportunities that I can't say yes to all of them.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of freedom in that, being able to like
Yeah.
kind of pick and choose and be like, it's
And
not the
just
right
general
one.
decisiveness. Like,
Right.
leave the playing field with no gray area. You know what I mean? Like, just
Right.
go through a business opportunity and either shut it down or take it full stride. But
Right.
don't leave like a bunch of gray area where like, so are you in or not? Like, is this what
Right.
we're doing? And then you're continuing to chew on things that your gut told you shouldn't be chewing on, but
Right.
you keep rolling it around and wasting energy.
Right. Ultimately, the decision is probably less important than making the decision.
Yeah. Yep.
Like yes or no, probably 90% of the time, both of them will work. But like,
Hmm.
yeah, angsting over one or the other, or like regretting it when you've made a decision.
Yeah.
That's a tricky
Binary,
one.
man. Yes or no.
Well, that's like the just like ruminating on kind of like ideas and problems and plans is probably like a very similar thing.
Hmm.
Like I feel like sometimes I'd be better off just being like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. Like I'm going to make 20 knives a month every month for this entire year and then just like forget about it. Because at the end of the year, like if I did that, that year was a success. It works,
Right.
right? If I
Yeah.
change it, like, or if I said no, I'm not going to do that. Like, yeah, it's funny. Like in retrospect, I feel like there's a lot of decisions and plans that we make where you're like, oh, it actually didn't matter. Like it didn't matter at all.
Yeah. So that kind of circles back to something I mentioned earlier of like, is it possible that planning, like kind of the bigger picture stuff, is more of a pacifier? And what I mean by that is like, you want to, like, anxiety is not something that feels good. And when you
Right.
make plans, that's what anxiety is for, from like a biological
Right.
standpoint, is forces you to make a plan
Right.
so that you feel secure
Yep.
and then you move forward. Is it possible that planning is a pacifier for your anxiety and that it maybe isn't doing much externally other than just pacifying
Oh,
yourself?
fully. Oh, I think that is something that I can speak from like direct experience as that being true.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that anxiety can like act in a way where the planning is like scratching that itch,
Mm-hmm.
where you're essentially getting like a dopamine release in the planning of the thing, which is reducing the anxiety.
Yeah. And
So you can over plan.
you get circular, and that's devolves to analysis paralysis that you hear
Right.
about.
Or you just start to go off the rails and plan for like every possible eventuality.
Right.
Which I think there at certain points in life there's like some benefit to, like being able to see like multiple outcomes, um,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to like kind of create a game plan for how to approach that
Mm-hmm.
situation from multiple angles. But yeah, I think a lot of times, like in my case, like I look at planning and I'm like, I just over plan because my brain is active and it's like, okay, cool. Like, cool, you're done with the airlines. Well, all right, like what's the next thing? As opposed to just being like, I mean, the airlines are done and I've got work to do.
Right.
It's like easy to
Yeah.
plan the next improvement or like the next goal from like a like a progress or gain perspective, which I think for me, I notice is kind of the red flag,
Yeah.
right? What is the goal? Is the goal is kind of the outcome more?
Right.
If it's heavily erring on the side of it just being like more growth, like tools, shop, money, whatever it is, that's a time where I try to kind of like look at it,
Mm. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's a challenging paradox almost, of
That's
like,
why I was asking you about your shop. Like if you feel like in your work, if you are settled, kind of like this is my shop space, these are the tools that I have, the way that my workflow is, and then you're just able to work. Like, do you feel stable in that way?
uh, yes, and not totally right now because I have a new machine on board that kind of stirred the pot as far as like my workflow,
Right.
and so I'm re-stabilizing, but I have like the scheme and the feel for like where that's going to head, and so I felt pretty stable before that, and now like I'm increasing the stability, and I think the two machines helps with that, and one of the things is like I'm wanting to get further ahead. I do custom knives, you know what I mean? So people go on the website, they choose all their materials, their handle scales, their Kydex color, blah, blah, blah. And so I've always been playing from behind of like filling orders, but I want to have a more streamlined system where I have like inventory of components. And that'll even further stabilize the workflow
Right.
because instead of being 100% reactive, it's more like I'm leading.
Right.
Um, and having the capacity of two machines is what's going to hopefully do that. And so what I'd been doing was like I would have a certain amount of orders and order say G10 in my Carta, and I would calculate like this is how much I need for current orders to
Right.
fill them plus 25% just so that a few orders come in the meantime I'm all right. And I would cut it all up on a table saw, machine them all. And then by the time I assembled those knives and get them out the door, I got a new batch of orders that I got to look at, do the numbers. Whereas what I did this time is I just ordered like an enormous amount of all the colors in a rough ratio of what I think they sell at. And then I have had them all water jet into coupons. And
I
there
was
it's
gonna say
way
that would be a game changer.
yeah, it's way more than what I have sold for the
Right.
first time. And I'm gonna inventory the coupons unmachined because the next knife is gonna have a handle that fits in that same coupon.
Right.
And so I'll have X amount of inventory per color per knife that is
Just to get
machined,
rolling.
and then establish a system where okay, I'm down to only 5 sets of green canvas micarta overland handles. I gotta replenish that, and I have the coupons already, and then pay attention when the coupons run low. That's my restock, and so waiting for material and water jet doesn't affect my output. That's
Totally.
all like totally back end.
Yep.
And so that's where I'm trying to get. And so I want to get to where it's kind of like it's basically lean manufacturing model of like the just in time thing of like
Right.
I'm only building like these knives are getting built like days before they're going out the door, and they're getting assembled, and they're getting, allocated the different resources right at the point of assembly in a sense. And so that's where
Does
I'm
that
headed.
hold though if you are ordering additional material and like starting to stockpile some? Because that's not, I mean, that doesn't really tie into the lean thing, does it?
No, you're right. The inventory keeping low, the minimum viable inventory is like the
So
lean
maybe that's
model.
flexible target.
Yeah. So it's like whatever. I mean, the number of coupons that I have is inventory in addition to the inventory of the handles, but
Right.
that I only want that to be a certain amount. I don't want it to be like an overwhelming
Well, and
amount.
that the beauty of it is, I mean, this is like batch and queue, right? Which is super effective for small shops. So
Hmm.
like you batch work that you can, whether that's machining parts or out of curiosity, how much time do you think it saves you water jetting your coupons versus you cutting them on a table saw?
Oh, not a crazy amount because, like, honestly, if it's a sharp blade, the hard part is going through blades fast, but
Yeah.
it cuts up pretty quick. It's just, it's the messiest. It's the part of making these knives that I like the least.
Yeah.
And that's why I cut it and
That's
took
a
it to water
perfect,
jet,
yeah, that's
is
a
because I
perfect reason.
freaking hated it. It was
Right.
like, you I would fall behind on orders because I would wanna do other things. Like, I'd look
Right.
at that stack and be like, "The next thing I should logically do is cut all that material up, but I'm gonna design today instead." It was like I'd kick the can, and I was like, "I need to delete that. I can't be
Yeah.
doing something that I literally hate?"
No,
So,
that's a super good way to deal with it. Well, and the question of time, I mean, it's relative because you can either use your time, which you like. If I asked you, I was like, "Hey, dude, I need you to cut handle scales for me on your table saw. How much would you charge me to do that? And is it
uh,
cheaper than water jet?" Like,
hard no.
hard no, right?
Hard no.
So that's like a really honest way, I think, to look at some of these things where you're like, I would rather pay to have this job done regardless
Yeah.
of the amount of my own personal time it takes.
Right, and the kicker that kind of delayed that decision was, like, because of the way I was doing it, I would, accumulate a certain amount of orders that I'm
Yeah,
trying to fill, and sometimes it'd be like, "Oh, this one color," let's say it's red G10, there's only 1 or 2 orders of that color, and it's like, I can't justify a sheet that is equivalent to the size of the other materials,
sure.
and so I it's pretty difficult to take a bunch of sheets to water jet all the time.
Yeah,
That's like, this one's 6 inches by 12 inches. This
right.
one's 36 by 24. This It's like they would just side eye you pretty hard if you
Sure.
came in with like 20 different sizes. And so what I decided was like, I don't care about that. Whatever colors I have, I'm going to order a 24 by 36 sheet, and I'm going to have it the coupon match other knives such that I know I'll use them. And
Eventually.
so I'm going to be over inventoried on those, but it allows me to water jet. So
Right.
it's a must.
Well, and the flip, like another way you could do it is you could just say, like, all right, I'm gonna keep X amount of, 12 by 6, you know, coupons in the shop of
Mhm.
these really funky materials that are never going to be standard.
Right, right.
Somebody wants this color, that's when you break out the table saw and you
Yeah,
cut two sets and you're
odds
done.
and
It's like,
ends.
yeah, it's like an odds and ends. And that's actually a level of flexibility that I really like because we are small enough that we can still do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Where a lot of companies that would never, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, if they can't justify a full blown custom material order for like
Yeah.
2,000 pounds of it, then it doesn't make sense.
But it's
But
interesting to see, like, even in your head, you're shifting some of those processes because you just realize you're like, okay, that efficiency to not have to do this one horrible, horrible task.
and that's a perfect
Like,
example of like, what am I going to stop doing?
right.
I'm going to stop bandsawing or table
Yeah.
sawing
To
G10. I'm going to
G10.
stop doing that. And so, what does
Oh,
that mean? That means it's going to get water jet. What does that
yeah.
mean? That means I need bigger sheets. That means I need to have an inventory system. That means other knives need to fit the same coupon. Like, it precipitates other decisions,
Right.
and they happen automatically. But is all I had to do was tell myself, I'm done with the table saw. And then you just do the rest of the work. And then I imagine a year from now, I'll look back and say, it worked. It did what I needed it to do. And it just took one decision. It just
Right.
took, I'm not going to table saw it.
It's
You
pretty
know,
nice.
so that's a goal.
Yeah.
You could call that a goal of like, I'm not going to use the table saw anymore on
Right.
G10. And then the rest is just execution and focus on the details. And
Yeah.
so
Well, it's kind of like, okay, so my plan, I think I mentioned that, like the plan for doing five, making sure that I do 5 folders a month.
I don't think you told me
Honestly,
the plan.
okay. So the plan, since we've been in this shop, like my shop's still not done. Like I was finishing setting up my surface grinder yesterday.
Mm.
Like because of the way that work has changed and it kind of come in and out and focus on priorities and kids and all this stuff, my shop hasn't had to have all of the pieces in place until now to really function. Like before we left the Cape, I made a ton of parts
Mhm.
because I knew that we were going to be down for like an indeterminate amount of time. What I didn't know that was that like we are going to be in a pandemic. I wasn't going to be doing shows. I was going to be making like less folders, like all this stuff. Right. So as I've been kind of looking for just like different, I don't know, like goals, right? Like some consistent goals to hit. The tricky part being that they're not like hypercritical, right? Like if I don't
Mhm.
make the 5 folders a month, like nothing happens. It's just that I would rather be doing that. So essentially what I did was I kind of set this goal for myself, which is I'm going to try to do 5 folders a month along with everything else that I'm doing. But it's primarily for the process. So 5 is like an easy batch size. It's less about having that, making sure I get them done every month than making sure that there are always 5 knives moving through my shop.
Mhm.
Right. That makes doing a show much easier because I know that like I've got 5 knives coming up. Maybe it takes 7 or 10 knives to a trade show. Um, it also forces me to get all of my equipment online because at
Mhm.
this point I'm out of the parts that I'd pre-machined. So it's like basically last week I started on a batch of Quikens frame locks and heat treated blades yesterday. The next step is surface grinding. Well, don't have a surface grinder. So the rest of yesterday shifted to setting up my surface grinder.
Mhm.
The next day I have in the shop will be back to surface grinding. And it ties in really heavily with this maker manager schedule. And it's like, so far, it's been really nice, man. Like up until today, this week, all I've done is just work on knives, but also having the freedom to know that today I'm going to get in the office theoretically and hustle on kind of like the thought work and some of like the longer term goals and projects.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You it kind of I like that game plan. It kind of made me think a little bit about when you're setting goals, like how to set them, and maybe a good idea for a goal. And it sounds like what you're doing is there's smaller goals, there's bigger goals, and then there's enormous goals. The
Right.
sizing of the goal should maybe be try to make it like a singular narrow goal, but it's like 3 goals removed from you,
Right.
smaller goals, and then attack that because you know it's going to take you through these other problems
Right. And
or
things that I was
situations.
procrastinating on.
Exactly.
Like
So it's
there, I got to a point where I didn't want to work on my shop anymore.
mhm,
But to really be able to have make the knives that I want to make, like my equipment has to be fully functional.
right.
There's another component that ties into the 5 thing, which is I could have just made it open ended and said, all right, I'm going to do 20 folders a month. One of my biggest goals moving forward is to get functional with Fusion 360 and to upgrade my machining practices. 5 knives in a batch allows me to then look at the next 5 knives, whatever it is, and make a process improvement on a small scale.
Mhm,
So like for the Quiken frame lock right now, I think like I have 2 goals. I'm going to thin out the blade stock, which means I need, I'm going to go from 156 to 141. That means I'll machine the backspacer thinner and I want to design like a 3D milled clip.
mhm,
That's one generation of changes, but just the clip alone, if I do the clip in Fusion, that is 100% gain in my effectiveness. Cause right now I'm using Rhino.
right.
So it's like, instead of getting trapped into the idea of like, all right, I'm off and running, like I'm going to make folders. This is going to allow me to kind of hopefully work through my current models and make improvements. And at a point, jump kind of organically into a new model.
Mhm, yeah.
So it's like a goal of like reasonable scale,
Right. At
right?
reasonable scale, and also, like you said, it leads you to do the things that need done in the intermittent
Right.
period. You know, like you have to use Fusion to do that. You have
Yeah.
to dial in XYZ to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And you will benefit maybe more from those smaller checkpoints than you will the big goal. You know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah,
But
the five knives are like it's like a moot point. It
right.
really is about like, oh man, okay, well, I improved my fixture between that run of Quikens and this run, and it
Hmm.
like over the years I've batch and queued for so long where it's like I'll just run 20 or 30 part sets of folders, and then the next time I'm machining I'll run the next model and run a bunch of parts, but that ties you into the way that they are made.
Hmm.
And at this point, my head is so firmly kind of rooted in the concept of like R&D and prototyping and learning that for me to make the same model repetitively, like I have to go like full Toyota on it. I have to be like,
Yeah.
all right, I made 5 of these. Like, how can I make it better?
Yep. Continual improvement.
Yeah. And I think that's my hack right now for planning. Cause I was having a really hard time like with longer term goals. Um, Primarily because for the last 5 years, I had been pushing so hard on a set of goals that when I achieved those, like I didn't have a backup.
Hmm.
It was like those were done. It's like getting out of a fist fight. And I was sitting there going like, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah. That's
You
it. It's
know,
like a hangover from achieving a goal.
total hangover. Like, yeah, interesting
I could
process.
imagine
So,
if you were like, if you're a football player and you won the Super Bowl,
yep.
and then the next day you're like, am I going to
Mm,
paint something? Am I going to,
like eat these chips.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well,
Right.
there's so much buildup between like
Yeah.
shows like that have always been like that for me where it's like I work, build. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not like actually like engaging in my life for long stretches of time. This is like early 20s primarily, where I just like check out and I go to the show and it would just like completely overwhelm me. So all of a sudden, like you see all of the people that you sell all your knives, you've got all the money, you go to the bar, you drink a bunch, and then there's other people that and then like Sunday morning you get up and go and I'm playing and you go home and you're in your quiet shop again.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it was just like,
Steep
man,
drop off.
steep drop off.
Tell
So
me this. Has this ever crossed your mind?
yeah.
Have you ever thought like, okay, let's say you buy that $100 million ticket, that lottery ticket, and you win. Has it ever crossed your mind that like it has for me that it would take something away from me in that like what you're saying, like my goals, they do involve like setting my family up for success.
Yeah.
And like if that disappeared where it's like they're already set up,
Right.
I don't know what I would do. You know what I mean? Like I don't know
So
what
I
would get me
will
going.
I will tell you my opinion. I don't think it needs to be the $100 million lottery ticket.
Mhm.
I think you will very easily in the next, I don't know, 5 years, probably hit a point where the financial driver that you're feeling now isn't the driver.
Mhm.
So that for me on a planning side is an interesting question because it's like, well, if that goes away, what's your driver? Like what's
Yeah.
the backup?
Yeah.
$100 million
That's
dollars, man. Yeah. Like
I can hardly sense what that would feel like. I don't know. It seems so alien to me to like
the number
to
is
have
the
to
thing
find a
that's
new.
yeah, the number is the thing that feels alien, I think. Sorry to interrupt. Like
Oh no.
they talk about like, okay, once you achieve like what I forget what it is in the US, it might be like $70,000 a year. Like the quality of life between like, a $30,000 a year job and 70 is huge. 70 to 200 is like not huge
Hmm.
because the needs are met. You're not like worrying about where your groceries
Yeah.
are coming from. You're not worrying about how you're paying your mortgage.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what's the alternative like inspiration? What's the fuel?
Well, I think what's interesting for me that I've tried to learn about myself that I think I might have kind of pinned down is I think it's for me it's like the pursuit of growth, and I don't mean like the money. I mean
Right.
like developing a self-sustaining system for like a family
Yeah.
the pursuit of that is like really fun for me. Like it's
Yeah.
really interesting and exciting. And what like the pursuit part of it, it's like there's got to be a pursuit for me, it feels like, you know what I mean? And then like what else would I pursue if my family was taken care of? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that's crossed my mind of like what if I really don't want to come into money? You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know. Cuz it's
Well,
like
or
it's
like you said, what if you, no, I don't think there's you don't want to come into money. Let's get rid of
right.
that one. Like,
Yeah, right.
scratch that. It's better. It's
Right.
like better to have that problem and deal with it at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, something that a lot of people look at money as the fix.
Mm,
And I don't think that exists.
right.
Like, I think that a lot of the problems that we are trying to solve around our businesses and like based on financial sides, like this will be better once I achieve X amount.
Right.
I don't think that's actually the case.
Yeah.
I think we're better off like enjoying the process of our work
Mhm.
and letting that make us money.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Everything in its season, but I do think
That's
it
it.
plays.
It's deep, man. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, it's something I've thought about. Not because I'm like I'm gonna make so much money on knives that I'm not gonna know what to do with myself. But there's always that $100 million lottery question that is like if you take any question to its extreme, it makes you think like deeper about the question, you know.
Totally.
And that's why I mean because you know sometimes you see the Powerball go crazy and you go buy a ticket and then you think about it and you're like I you know what would I do tomorrow
Right.
if I won? Because it's like would I be depressed? I don't know. I might
Right.
be. Like, I might actually be depressed if I
Like
won that.
I mean, the numbers would say that you would be. I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
yeah.
it's
So,
kind of a, I don't know, man. Yeah, that does get kind of deep. But
yeah,
I
right.
I have a theory around some of this stuff too, which is like as it relates to knife makers, I think sometimes there can be like this like doggedness almost around like how you work for your money.
Mhm.
Right. And I think it's because knife making ultimately is like rooted in like this very blue collar mentality. Um, Similar to artists being like that, the idea of like selling out or like not doing your art for financial gain. I'm like, I don't know, man. I just want to see my friends like make enough money to,
Yeah.
provide for their families and like have a good life. And with the realization that inside of the knife industry, this is fully feasible. When I
Mhm.
started, people told me that you could not make a living making knives.
Look at you now.
Well,
Did did you go send him a Facebook message like 10 years
yeah,
later?
no. Here's me on a yacht.
Yeah.
I don't actually have a yacht, but no, but like it was like a really common thing. And I can't actually figure out what the driver was for people to tell like a teenager that. So
Mhm.
the jokes were always like, if you want to make $1 million making knives, start with two,
Right.
right? And that idea that just like don't quit your day job, and you're who like who is actually giving that advice?
I know.
It's terrible,
I got that advice from him all around. I remember
right?
having to explain myself to some people. My dad really understood. He's done that. He's done the same thing. But like, there's people in my life where it was like, yeah, this is sounds funner to me. I guess that was like part of
Yeah,
my
it's like a
best
big
answer.
part.
Is
Did
like
you
it.
ever have anybody that was like well known and had made their money tell you not to do it?
I don't think so. I I don't think so. But I don't know. I guess
Maybe
I
had
didn't run
one.
around with a lot of people like that. But
Sure. Yeah, I guess because like trade shows, like you were doing trade shows different than I was doing at the same age.
mhm,
But like I never know. Like I never know what people's driver. So I always say the opposite. I'm like, absolutely you can make money.
yeah,
Like
right,
you can make lots of money. You just
yeah,
have to like plan for it and have some
yeah,
goals.
yep. Trust
And
the
then
process.
yeah. Um Reminds me of a quote from a movie like hold on tightly, let go lightly. I always like
Ah,
that. That's kind of like how I look at plans. I'm like, man, the idea of not fighting a weak position as like things start to like turn and you're like, my plans aren't working.
yeah,
This isn't my goal. And you're like, white knuckle it.
right. Yeah, it's
Pass.
there's a time to jump off. of every ship.
Speaking of time to jump off, we're probably getting there. What do you have any goals for next week?
So my goal, I can't reuse the same goal, but I will finish those by next week more than
Okay.
likely. I mean, I'm within 24 hours of doing that, so that'll be off the checklist. And then depending on whether we're on here Tuesday or Thursday, we usually record this on somewhere between Tuesday and
Yeah,
Thursday,
right in
Wednesday
there.
sometimes. I'd like to have the fixture for the Overland built
Ooh.
because I need to. The next process for this machine is I need to have. I've got it all mapped out and I've got all the hardware and I've got it like theoretically developed in my head, but I do have to do the fusion work and machine it. But it's aluminum, so I mean we're not talking rocket science. Which means mounting the Pearson on the machine, mounting the pallet on the Pearson, and machining the pallet. So that's what I want done
It's
because
a
I need to
solid
be
amount of work.
machining those overlands like soonish. So
Yep.
it's time to rock and roll.
Nice.
How
What
about
do
you?
I got? Well, Kaiser gets set up tomorrow. So basically, airlines are done. They're coming to land the power tomorrow and do the startup, which is super exciting. I'm going to try to get the 5 Quikens basically done. That's
What does
kind of my
basically
goal.
mean?
um, yeah, I'll try to have them done because I have
Okay.
to. So I have to finish. I think I finished the surface grinder. Basically, just like had to plumb. Like we changed the power and did all this, like put new coolant pumps and all this stuff in it. So I think I have it plumbed. I'm going to fire that up today. Surface grind the blades. I was trying to think about like what I've got left. So basically, I have surface grinding blades, then grinding blades, then lock fitting, and all of the finish work on 5 knives. Stretch goal would maybe be to have started machining on the next. Oh, see, here's the tricky part, right? If I do my 5 knives, what do I move on to after those? So it's like, do I go to Cypops or Polys? So, okay, I'm just going to say finish my 5 knives.
Okay. Finish 5 knives.
Finish 5 knives.
Begin maybe
Maybe.
if I build the fixture, that means I will immediately have been attempted to machine a bevel on the sile on the Overland.
Right.
So
Ooh.
that'll answer a lot of questions as soon as
And
that
you will
fixture is done.
video this.
So at at our next conversation, that'll make the actual. I'll circle back to the earlier conversation. If I make the goal to machine a bevel on the Overland on the sile, that means I will have to have built the pallet. So
Okay. So we're maybe seeing the next 2 weeks
what's that?
of goals.
No, this
Would
coming
that be
week.
in? So okay,
Yeah,
so you're going to make
yeah.
that you're going to make the
If
machining of the bevel the goal.
because that's and
Ooh.
just circling back to what I said earlier about like if I make the goal leapfrog over a couple other goals, I'll have to complete those to get there. Which
Ooh.
because
Okay.
if the fixture's done, I will be machining the bevels within minutes from that.
Within minutes. Okay.
So it's like
Oh,
that's
that's crazy.
yeah. So well, I mean, I already have run many of them on other fixtures, so I just have
Right.
to move the cam onto a new pallet, and I'm moving. So
How long is it going to take you to break down to actually build the fixture? Just to get into the weeds a little bit.
to build a fixture, well, I kind of mapped it out in my head for a while. I mean, it's going to be basically a day project, I think,
Okay.
just because I'm doing everything steel on steel. So
Nice.
I'm sinking threads that are steel in for the shoulder bolts, but then I'm on
Is
top
that
of the
like a
threads.
king cert or something like that? What is that?
It's it's OD threaded
Threaded
and ID
insert.
threaded.
Okay, got it.
So I Loctite the OD thread into a threaded hole that leaves a steel ID threaded hole. And that'll be deep down in the fixture. And then above that will be a drill bushing that's hardened,
Yep.
that's got a 1/4 inch precise hole. So the net effect is you'll have it flush with the top of the pallet. You'll see a 1/4 inch hole that's a hardened bushing dropping down into steel threads. So a shoulder bolt going through the blade has the location of the hardened drill bushing and the threads of the steel threads below.
Underneath. That's
So
pretty slick.
it's all steel on steel when you're pulling stuff off and on.
Yep.
So there's no wear. Aluminum's fine, but not over time for that
Right.
kind of stuff. And so that's where I want this thing to last. Like I'm building the fixture of fixtures for this knife is the goal.
Nice.
So And if it
All
works,
right.
then I copy and paste, and I have 2 of them, and I hot swap. So that's the dream.
All right. Okay. Good goals.
Sweet.
All
All right,
right, man.
guys. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
If
Thanks for
you've
listening.
followed us this far along, thank you. And please stick around and let us know what you think. If you have any input, DM us or whatever.
Yep. Leave us a comment. Send us
Yeah,
an email.
sure love it. Yeah, thank you
Leave us
guys.
a review. See you around.
Peace.